Okay, I will go ahead and get us started. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the presentation on Immigrant's Guide to Financial Planning. This webinar is being recorded and the recording link will be emailed to all attendees. This webinar is provided as an educational service by Alcorn Immigration Law and Northwestern Mutual. The information discussed is an overview only, should not be construed as legal advice or advice to take any specific action. Please be sure to consult a knowledgeable professional with assistance with your particular issue. Lastly, please submit any questions you may have by using the Q&A function. The questions do get shared publicly, so please do not share any sensitive or personal information. There is an option to submit your questions anonymously. We will try to get as many questions as time permits, and it is now my pleasure to introduce to you Anita and Chris.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We are here and ready to present, as you guys have all been waiting for, the Immigrant's Guide to Financial Planning. I am so grateful to be joined by Christopher Welton, who is a wealth management advisor with Northwestern Mutual. He will give us some insight, some of his tips, tricks, or just a little bit of what we all should know about wealth management and financial planning. Thanks so much for coming and joining us today, Chris.
Thank you for having me.
Again, I am Anita. I'm one of the partners at Alcorn Immigration Law. I will be speaking to you all just kind of high-level overview of immigration, all types of immigration, and we'll go through that. Again, any questions that you may have specifically immigration-wise, please put them into the Q&A function so that we can go through as many of your questions as we can today. A little bit about me. I am an immigrant myself. I came to the US when I was 4.5 years old, and my mom was teaching me the difference of the words yes and no on the airplane. So immigration very much hits home for me. I came to the US and I received a green card. It was pink. It's usually in the presentations. It's not, sorry, I can't show it to you today, but if you are so keen on seeing what my pink green card looked like, you can shoot me an email and I can share it with you. I am an expert in family-based immigration. It is the area of immigration law that I know and I love the most, but I am the partner at Alcorn that handles all of our firm's case production. So I have my hands in every single one of the pots in terms of employment-based immigration as well as family-based immigration. I am a proud alum of UCLA, go Bruins, as well as I went to Santa Clara Law. Chris, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Anita, and go Bruins. So I am Chris Welton. I'm a wealth management advisor. I am not an immigrant, but we work with many, many families and clients who are. And Steph Chen, who's here, who's on my team, actually is a proud immigrant from Canada. Toronto Maple Leafs fan. So I grew up on the East Coast, so from Philadelphia and Vermont. And then I started off my career in investment banking at Merrill Lynch in the 1990s in the corporate institutional client group, and then ended up working in private equity investing for the firm, which brought me out to LA originally. And I ended up doing an MBA also at UCLA, so go Bruins. And and we've been up here in the Bay Area for just about 10 years now. My wife works at a large technology company as a product director, and her family actually emigrated originally from Mexico on that. And so one of the things that we were so excited and passionate about today is to use our expertise. I'm a CFA charter holder and a certified financial planner, and as well as an MBA, to use our expertise to help immigrants get off to a good financial start. And one of the things that we've noticed is that there's some different perspectives and different planning techniques that are applicable. And some of that will be different for how folks have come here in different ways, but we'd like to share that with you and just look to engage in a conversation on that. As we go through this today, feel free, as Anita mentioned, to just put in questions in the Q&A. I'm curious for each of you right now, feel free to just write in, what is your top question on immigration or on money, and put that in there, and we'll kind of address that and go through as we go through here. And the more driven we are by your comments and questions, the more applicable and relevant we'll be here. And so I think hand this back to Anita, and we're here and we're happy to give time to anyone, by the way, who wants to follow up on conversations, 20, 30 minutes to after the call as well. So this is going to be general education day, but everybody's situation is different on things. So with that, I'll pass it back to Anita, and we can, I think, launch into to your part of the presentation.
Awesome, let's do it. All right, so super high level overview of immigration. You can either enter the United States with a visa of some sort, eventually obtain your green card, which is lawful permanent resident, where you're still a citizen of your home country, but ultimately a lawful permanent resident of the United States. And then finally, you can apply for US citizenship after, more often than not, the 5-year anniversary of having your green card. Alternatively, instead of entering the United States initially as a visa holder, and that could be a temporary H-1B visa, a student visa, maybe even a visitor's visa. Alternative to that, you can actually enter the United States straight away as a green card holder. Where you've never stepped foot into the United States before, somebody petitions for you to get a green card, whether it's a spouse, an employer, a sibling maybe, and then you attend a consular interview or a green card interview in your home country, and then you enter the United States with your green card. That's how I came into the United States, and that's how a lot of people do it as well. So is there a difference between the green card? Is it better for me to get my green card in the US versus getting my green card in my home country? Ultimately, it's the exact same green card. Some have there's some reasons why somebody would get their green card in their home country. And that's all very case dependent. It's all very individualized, all very personal. But all options are available. Immigration law has, I would say, 4 main sections. There's family-based immigration, which I'll go into a little bit more depth right now. Employment-based immigration, and then there is removal defense, so somebody who is in removal proceedings, deportation, and then there's humanitarian areas of immigration as well. And then there's always like some miscellaneous areas of immigration, like the diversity visa, and other areas of immigration as well. But first, let's focus on family-based immigration, which is, I would say, one of the larger areas of immigration. So I'm married, I'm a United States citizen, and I am getting married, or I am married to somebody who is living in Armenia. What can I do to get them to come to the United States legally so that they can live here with me and we can live our happily ever after? Well, you file for them to get their green card. If they're in their home country and outside of the United States, that's one pathway, versus if they're in the United States already. Let's say my husband has an H-1B visa and he's in the United States. I can apply for them to get a green card based off of our relationship. My husband can get his green card based off of employment if he has an H-1B visa, but I can also petition for him to get a green card based off of our marriage. So if my partner, if my husband entered the United States legally and we are now married, I can file, or we can together file, what's called an adjustment of status for them to get their green card here in the United States. Ultimately, they attend an interview. We will attend an interview together where we will be questioned on our relationship, where my husband will be questioned on his just eligibility to get a green card as well. So have you had any crimes? Have you had any issues with immigration? Tell me about how you guys met. Where did you meet? How did you meet? Who was at your wedding? Questions like that are what they will be asking you at that marriage-based interview. Not like what we see in the movies, like in The Proposal, I think is the movie with Sandra Bullock, where they separate them and put them in 2 different rooms. What type of toothbrush does she have? What side of the bed does she sleep on? That interview exists, but that's if you fail your very first interview and the officer suspects fraud of any type in your relationship, and that happens. But what they're looking at and what they're trying to focus on, is this a good faith relationship, or are they just married for green card purposes? So those types of questions will come up, and if you can answer them genuinely, then it's all gonna be okay. Let's say I'm a United States citizen again, and my fiance again lives in Armenia, but we're not married yet. I'm not ready to marry them just yet, but I want him to come into the United States, spend some time here in the US with me. And then eventually we'll get married and file the green card. Well, the K-1 fiance visa is an option for my partner, where I would petition for my partner to just come into the US first. Just come join me in the US as my fiance. My fiance would receive a single-use green visa in order for him to enter the United States, spend 90 days with me maximum. We have to get married within those 90 days. Then we go through the adjustment of status green card process as well. So that's a fine option as well. The difference between the K-1 fiance visa and then just going through straight away with the marriage-based green card pathway is time. The K-1 fiance visa could take upwards of like 10 to 12 months, whereas the marriage-based green card route can take on average, I would say 18 months, sometimes longer, depending on how impacted that consulate is. So if you're not married and this is an option available to you, then talk to an immigration attorney, have them weigh the pros and cons with you so that you can make that decision together. And then again, green card through marriage based off of consular processing. We're married, my partner is living outside of the United States, and I want them to come and visit me, not visit me permanently, come and live with me in the United States and get their green card. This pathway is available to both US citizens as well as lawful permanent residents. So a K-1 fiance visa cannot be petitioned or filed by a lawful permanent resident, and it can only be done by a United States citizen. Whereas the green card process can actually be done by both, because as a lawful permanent resident, you can petition for your spouse. It takes longer more oftentimes than not because of the visa bulletin that lawful permanent residents are subject to, which we'll talk about in a couple of slides, I believe. But it's available, it's an option. Ultimately, the partner attends an interview in the home country and then comes into the United States immediately as a green card holder with immediate permission to work, with immediate permission to travel internationally, and have no issues with that as well. If you obtain your green card based off of marriage, if you obtain it prior to your 2-year wedding anniversary, so you get that green card and the green card that you get is approved before your 2-year wedding anniversary, you will receive what's called a conditional green card, where it's only valid for 2 years. Closing or nearing to or getting closer to the expiration of that 2-year green card, you will have to file an additional application with USCIS to remove the conditions from that 2-year green card so that you can eventually get a 10-year green card. And with that, in order to do that, you have to prove that you're still in a good faith relationship. You are still married, and here's proof that we are still married. If you're not still married, that's okay as well. You will have to prove that, we got married, we thought this was going to work out, but I don't know, 50% of marriages don't work out. So when we first got married, we absolutely got married for the right purposes. We didn't get married for a green card. We got married because we loved each other and we thought that this would work out long-term, and it didn't. Here's proof that we tried to make it work long-term. Here's proof that we did marriage counseling. But sorry, can I still have my 10-year green card anyway? Basically is how that goes. And it's usually fine. Now, in terms of who else can be sponsored. So this is kind of what's more so important to Chris on the financial planning aspect of it. And I know he will touch upon this, but when you're a United States citizen, you are able to petition for your parents. You're able to petition for children, and you're able to petition for your siblings. So with that, only United States citizen can petition for parents and siblings. Nobody else can. So if you are interested in petitioning for your parents or for your siblings, you have to go through the citizenship process. And with that, especially petitioning for a parent, it's very similar to petitioning for a spouse. So basically everything that I just talked about, petitioning for a spouse, you do the exact same thing where you go through the same process as petitioning for your parents, but obviously you don't have to prove that it's a good faith marriage. You have to prove that you are a child of that United States citizen. And it can actually even be a step parent. So you can petition for a step parent as well as a biological parent as well, which is pretty cool. All right, so family-based immigration is a big aspect of immigration. Employment-based immigration, I would say, is an even bigger aspect of immigration. So this is really where the alphabet soup of immigration really comes in, because there's actually there is a green card for every single letter of the alphabet. What I've listed here are, for the most part, the larger or the bigger chunks of mostly the visas that people are applying for. The one that we all know, that we all love, that everybody hears about is the H-1B visa, which is a visa that obviously goes through an annual lottery that makes immigration attorneys want to pull out their hair during that annual lottery, because it is our busy season. So with that, an H-1B visa is for individuals of specialized skills. So you have to have at least a bachelor's degree, or if not a bachelor's degree, you have to prove that you have 12 years of work experience within that field in order to prove that you do have specialized knowledge, you have the specialized skill in order to be an H-1B employee. Other visa options available to individuals is an O-1A visa. This is a temporary visa as well, which is for individuals of extraordinary ability. There are 8 criteria that USCIS requires an individual of extraordinary ability to meet under the O-1A category. If you can meet 3 of those 8 criteria, USCIS will give you a 3-year green card. Just kidding, a 3-year visa, not a green card. But the O-1A is a kind of a green card pathway in that it has a big brother component called the EB-1A visa, which is also very, very similar to the same O-1A criteria, but instead of 8 criteria, there's 10 criteria. If you can prove that you meet 3 of them, then you can actually get your green card based off of the fact that you are an individual of extraordinary ability. So awesome option, awesome pathway. Another option available for people of specific countries is equivalent or similar to the H-1B visas, but for Australia, for example, an E3 visa is something that's available to Australians, almost identical to the H-1B visa process, except they're not subject to the visa lottery on an annual basis. They can get it year-round. TN visas is a part of the NAFTA agreement between Canada, Mexico, and the United States. So if you're from either of those countries, you can obtain a TN visa, which again is a non-immigrant temporary visa that allows people from Canada or Mexico who have at least a bachelor's degree to enter the United States and work in the United States for a specific employer under that specific visa category. A J-1 visa is available to all employers where they want to hire somebody on a very temporary basis. If they want to hire maybe a researcher, an intern, or a trainee. Personally, I don't recommend the J-1 visa category, but if you ever find yourself in this category, or if you want to hire somebody in this category, it's certainly an option. But if you're talking to me, I will try to convince you to find another option instead. There's E1, E2 visas that are available to individuals of specific countries as well that have treaties with the United States that allows you to invest at least $100,000 in the United States by creating either a brand new company of your own, maybe even purchasing a franchise. But with that, you're able to enter the United States to build a business to boost the economy here in the United States under those visa categories. Or if you don't want to go through just getting going with a visa, entering the United States as a visa, you can again come into the United States straight away with your green card. If you're not from India or China. But if you, let's say I'm an employer and I want to just hire somebody who's living outside of the United States, I'm not going to waste my time with the visa lottery for the H-1B. I'm just going to petition for them to get their green card. I'm okay with them spending a couple of extra years outside of the United States, but eventually I want them here in the United States with a green card. I can go down basically a whole host of options or ideas of getting them to join me in the United States as my employee. So the EB-1A we've already touched upon. The EB-1B is similar to the EB-1A, but it's for researchers specifically. The EB-1C is for somebody who's entering the United States on an intercompany transfer. So let's say I'm living and working outside of the US for a foreign company and that foreign company has an affiliate here in the United States, I have the option of doing an intercompany transfer and working in the United States and living in the United States under that category. The EB2 national interest waiver is a similar-ish visa to the EB1A visa, being an immigrant visa. So again, a green card pathway. The EB2 and the EB3 visa categories are also known as the PERM, going through the PERM process and an employer applying for their employee to get their green card through their PERM process. This is where you will typically hear, oh, as the employer, I will have to go through recruitment and I will have to prove that I tried to hire an American worker, but I was unable to. Here's proof of all of the people that applied for the positions and then ultimately were unable to get the job with us because they just didn't meet the cut. And then the EB5 investment pathway as well is the pathway where somebody wants to invest at least, I would say, $1 million in the United States by creating a business in the US, starting at least 10 United States citizen jobs and going down that investment pathway as well. So all ideas and options that are available. The International Entrepreneur Parole. So this is I'm not going to say it's new, but it's something that just recently basically was resurrected. So the IEP program was brought in as an option, or it was created under the Obama administration, where it was an option for an international founder from any country to come into the US, build a startup from the ground up and stay in the US. They have the option of basically staying in the US for a while, but it's not status, it's a parole. It's non-status. You're allowed to be in the US, you're allowed to work in the United States, but there's not much like you can do from it. If you want to change your status from let's say from having IEP and then eventually getting a green card, you have to actually leave the US and then come back to the United States thereafter with a green card. But regardless, it's an awesome option that is now available to many individuals that was not available during the Trump administration. Nobody was filing IEP applications during that point in time, but now under Biden, we are filing these applications. Many people are filing these applications as well, and it's absolutely awesome and it's wonderful. In order to qualify under the IEP program, you will need to have either the $264-ish thousand of investment from a qualified investor, and a qualified investor is either a US citizen or a lawful permanent resident, or you have to have at least $105-ish thousand from US government grants in the last 18 months, or you have bits and pieces of both of them that you're able to prove that you qualify for IEP. From there, once you have your green card, again, for either, more often than not, for 5 years, you are able to go down the citizenship pathway. So if you've been a green card holder for either 5 years, or if you've been a green card holder for 3 years and you're married to a United States citizen and have been living with that United States citizen spouse for the last 3 years, then you can actually qualify for US citizenship at the 3-year anniversary of having your green card, as opposed to having to wait for your 5-year anniversary. With citizenship, there are specific requirements that you have to meet. Mostly the most difficult one that people will kind of wrestle against is the physical presence requirement, where you have to be present in the United States 50% of the time in the last 5 years or 3 years. Or if not, you have to, you don't qualify. You'll have to wait a little while longer. And you also have to prove that you don't have any travel outside of the United States in more than 6-month chunk or increments. From there, you will be interviewed on your eligibility for US citizenship. And then from there, assuming that all is well, you'll be able to take the oath of allegiance to the US, become a US citizen. And then from there, you apply for your US passport. Immigration during COVID. It has been a very fun and interesting, almost 2 years now, practicing immigration under COVID. We have seen delays across the board with almost everything possible. USCIS locally has been trying to kind of adjust their sails, figure out what it is that they can do in order to make sure that they can still interview people and see people. So attorneys are able to attend interviews telephonically as opposed to going in person. There's been proclamation after proclamation saying who can enter the US from what specific countries, when they can enter. So it's been very interesting. The most recent proclamation that actually came in 2 days ago was just if you are vaccinated and you're basically if you're vaccinated, all you'll have to do is prove that you have a vaccine that's approved by WHO, as well as just show a negative COVID test in the last 3 years, and you'll be able to enter the United States. If you are a non-immigrant, so if you have a visa and you want to enter the United States, you have to be fully vaccinated. If you have any questions about the vaccination requirements or anything, reach out to me individually and I'd be happy to guide you through it. But it's a brand new, hot off of the press requirement. So it's definitely a change, that's for sure. All right, Chris, are you there? I sped through everything so I can give you some airtime.
Awesome.
Right, take it away.
Thank you, Anita. Thank you for that. And so as we're thinking about in the US, one of the things we want to think about is how to build a financial life. And so one of the things that we have to think about as immigrants is how to get established on items. Notice we had a question here from Peter. How can one build credit history before coming to the US? How can one build credit history in the US as an immigrant fast, or transfer one's existing credit history from the home country? Related to above, how to get a mortgage quickly upon immigrating. Thank you for the multi-part question. So unfortunately, I don't think there's a great answer to that. So when you come to the US, your credit history is invisible to US credit services. So effectively, you'll have to start from scratch. I'm not aware of any services that can transfer credit history or look previously to outside the US. And this particularly comes up in terms of credit instruments, mainly mortgages, credit cards, things that you want to do inside of there. The best advice I could give you is to think about building a credit history quickly and to get that going in an expedited manner. So monitor your credit ratings and credit scores with the credit bureaus, open bank accounts or credit card accounts for which you might be eligible, and search for banks that have special offers for immigrant and immigrant communities. You may, when you first arrive, be in a position to take a look at things like, prepaid cards or pre-funded cards as simply as a means of building credit, not as a long-term financial instrument and savings instrument on that. And in terms of mortgages, I would look at, I would look for credit offerings in banks that have special offers for immigrants on that front. The other thing to think about is it depends on if you're doing the mortgage with a cosigner or someone else. It might be easier for them to apply for the mortgage and for you to be listed in some fashion on that, which might help build credit, but check with your bank and with the instrument in that. Beyond that, the scope of this really is going to depend on your specific situation around that. So let's talk a little bit about how to create financial security and how to take a look at some of the items in here. One of the big things that we will see typically inside of this is thinking about financial goals and thinking about how you can be confident that you're going to plan to meet your financial goals. One of the challenges we tend to see for immigration, and this varies a fair amount based on country, a lot of times there's a great deal of surprise at the complexity of the situation in the US, particularly immigrants from Europe, where many services in Europe are provided to some extent or supported to some extent by the state. They're often surprised by the extent to which that there's a lot of variation and there's a lot of reliance on private provision of services, things like healthcare, long-term care planning, things like retirement security, and things like eligibility for programs like Social Security or Medicare. When we're looking at how to build a financial plan, the basics of something like this are going to be similar for each person, but the details are going to be different if you immigrate from a different country, and it will also be age dependent as well. The first is to save. The second is to have some good spending in the context of being able to save. And we often talk about a 20-60-20 as a good savings rule. You should save about 20% of your income. You should spend 60% on essential expenses, things like groceries and rent and things of that nature. And then 20% should go to discretionary expenses. And this would be things like travel, vacation, dining out, hobbies. Those are often the big ones we'll see here in the Bay Area. And then we'd have a way to grow that. So this would often come in terms of investing. A lot of the specifics on this will vary based on the country that you're from and where you have a financial life, particularly folks who come mid-career. Often the cleanest cases financially are folks who come as children or perhaps right after school where they're just getting going in a financial life. But in that case, savings is much like you would in the US. One of the big gotchas that we'll see folks doing is if they come over on a visa that might be temporary, like an H-1B, or sometimes we'll see this with folks who come over on TN visas, where they could potentially have to go back to, in many cases, Canada relatively quickly. There's a hesitancy to engage in savings over here because folks might say things like, well, geez, I'm not sure if I'm going to be here. What if I end up going back to whatever country I'm originally from on that? Well, that has a couple of problems. So number one, you still need to save regardless of where you're going to. And second, there can be a little bit of a money illusion in terms of the amount of money needed to save on that, particularly countries where there's a very different standard of living. So we have a lot of clients from India who may say things like, listen, it's very expensive here in the US. I could retire on a much lower standard of living back in my home country. That may or may not be true. What we've actually found for clients, and I'm thinking of a meeting that we had last week, one specific client who is moving back to their country of origin, which is India. They actually found that to live the same lifestyle that they would here, and they're now 20 years in the US with kids in US colleges and so forth, but to live the same lifestyle that they would here, it's actually more expensive to do it in India than it would be in the Bay Area, which I thought was very interesting. So the money illusion there is the lifestyle that you may have come and been raised in may not be the lifestyle that you would retire to, even if you went back to your home country. So we have to think about saving strategies that are going to work either way. And we have to ask some good questions about being realistic to make sure that you are agile, so that if you stay here, that you have a great life and a great retirement in the US using US retirement accounts, financial instruments, insurances, things of that nature. And if you end up going back to your country of origin or to a different country, that you have the flexibility to be agile there. What that tends to mean over time is that most clients have parts of their financial life in more than one country. And that usually is manageable, but often creates some complexity. So they may be subject to different tax regimes. There can be, depending on the country, different taxation and different ways of looking at the overall picture on things. So if you're looking at a country where you may have payouts, then the question is how you would withdraw from those retirement accounts, and also thinking about foreign exchange, how you would translate that back to where you're going to be. One of our core planning philosophies cross-border is we should always bias our savings and our investing to the country's currency that we plan to retire to. So for instance, if we plan to mostly retire in the US, we want to have most of our assets denominated in US dollars. We don't necessarily want to have that denominated in British pounds or in Canadian dollars or Mexican pesos or whatnot on that, because there can be a lot of fluctuations that happen specific to those countries that can put retirement at risk on that. Second is, if you do end up leaving the US or moving outside of it, there can be very specific implications. In particular, the US is extremely strict on financial regulation. And things like FATCA reporting, FATCA, are required disclosures, which have very severe tax implications for US permanent residents or citizens that hold mutual funds outside the US. And in particular, there are strong restrictions on holding US securities if you are located outside the US, even a jurisdiction like the UK, for example, London, or Switzerland. It turns out Switzerland actually has some very specific rules that are extremely restrictive for Swiss residents on owning specific financial instruments. A lot of this will vary depending on the jurisdiction you go to, but suffice it to say, if you move outside the US and are still subject to US taxation, which you probably will be if you go down the route of becoming a permanent resident or green or citizen, that can actually create a lot of issues on the back end. So that's something you want to think about as you move down the path to citizenship there. So in terms of thinking about protection, one of the other things that we want to think about is how can you protect and stay and be able to maintain here. One of the underappreciated features that we'll talk about here is disability insurance. If we have clients that are on, for instance, an H-1B, we want to make sure that if they get too sick to work, that their income can be protected. Now, often the case here is that if you're totally disabled, that you would have to leave the country or move back potentially, and that's the case. But the question we always want to bring up is, what if there's a partial disability? That's actually the much more common case. And often the point there is that we don't want to disrupt the immigration process or the visa status while that's in place. And so we want to financially make it so that you can continue to work your job, even if you had, for instance, a stroke, as some of our clients have had in their 30s. And they're not financially able to earn at the same level, but they don't also want to have a whole cascade effect in the rest of their life happen because they had a health event. So one of the key levels for that kind of insurance is to actually make sure that that protects your ability to retain your job, career, and visa status on that. Similarly, in some countries, like for instance, coming over from from India, there's often a very big, and this is more for mid-career professionals, there's a very big disparity in cost of living. So the savings that may have been perfectly fine and adequate earlier in a career in India, if you have someone who's mid-career, 30s, 40s, early 50s, that comes over here and plans to remain in the US, there could be a tremendous need for catch-up savings in retirement, and the need to save beyond the capacity or level of traditional US retirement instruments. This comes up a lot with companies that transfer workers. So if I think about local companies, Oracle, Synopsys, places like that that have substantial operations in both places. The compensation is significantly higher in the US, but so are the needs and demands for a lifestyle. So it becomes very important to be precise about the timeline, the level of savings, and the type of lifestyle you would like to lead into, work into. Also on mid-career, there becomes more of a question as to eligibility for government programs, such as they are here in the US, things like Social Security. For those of us that have lived and worked our entire careers in the US, we typically will have access to Social Security after 10 years, and then 35 years of earnings history is used for eligibility for Social Security benefits. Most folks will claim this somewhere between, depending on your birth year, somewhere between the ages of 62 to 70 years old. And it provides a really excellent baseline for retirement income and planning. And so that's something that, as we're looking at what we want to do long term, there's a real question mid-career: are you going to be eligible for that? And if you have a partial career set of earnings, it will probably be at a lower level. So what do we incorporate that as a retirement or financial independence plan assumption? And also, are you eligible for any savings schemes from your home country? And how would we layer that in, and to what extent should we look at that as part of the retirement planning? One of the particular things I'd like to call out also is to think through different time horizons and goals. So short term, so having cash that's available for immediate cash needs. 5 to 10 years is kind of medium term, so that we should take on a little more risk inside of here. And then longer term, 10 plus years, this is often retirement accounts, permanent life insurance, other types of investment accounts that can be inside of here that we can choose to take on more risk inside of it and potentially have a little bit of tax favor as well. Many of our clients, as they build a life in the US and they go through the visa process, often spouses will go through green card or citizenship processes at different rates and different speeds. They may not both become green card holders or citizens at the same time. And so that can create somewhat complex situations in terms of death, in terms of disability. And one of the big ones that we'll also see is planning for aging parents. Oftentimes when folks come here, it's somewhat earlier in their career, as they build a life, a lot of times families are located in geographically distant areas. Fast forward that 10, 20, 25 years, there's an increasing question of how you would provide for parents who might be in a different country, a different part of the world. Would someone take time off to go back and live with them and care for them in their home country? Or would you bring them here? If you were to bring them here, how would you bring them here? What are the immigration and visa implications of that? And also, once they're here, how do you make sure that they're happy and productive and healthy, and that they have access to the things that older citizens and older residents need? Things like healthcare, things like a community that they can be part of. Those are all very specific planning questions, and something that is increasingly important to many of our clients as they start to plan more and more for aging parents and for their own families on that. To the question here from Saeed, do you have a percentage allocation diagram? Here you go. You'll get this as part of it, the 20-60-20, and there's a number of other sort of rule of thumb formulas. Take these for what they are, which is rules of thumb that can be applied at a general form. In addition to 20-60-20 and the 20% savings and investing, I'd really expand that to say it's really a range of 15 to 30%. For the savings and investing, depending on where you're at in terms of life cycle. So young parents early in their career, more towards the 15%. Empty nest couples, really trying to maximize their retirement, really more towards the 30% side of things. And it's helpful to kind of analyze expenses here. We're big fans from a budgeting perspective. All of us kind of have a spreadsheet that we'll do, a Google spreadsheet or some such thing, which can be very precise. But from a budgeting standpoint, we really like to be strategic and to be forward-looking on that. And so when we're thinking about being strategic or being forward-looking, that means thinking about ways that we can, strategic areas we're spending money in, and ways that we could achieve our goals in the long run, and also areas that we might pare back or cut back a little bit on that. Another rule is thinking about saving and increasing this by 1% each year. So this starts to bump up your ability to save. Over 5 to 10 years, you're going to have a very stair-step way to kind of get in and do your goals. So if you start even at a small level by bumping this up, you'll have a ability to do that. Another theory in there is no more than 1 to 2% of your income it should go to taking care of all the pure risk stuff to guarantee your success. That's things like supplemental disability coverage on top of the intentionally defective coverage you have through work. Work coverage typically is great, but it is capped usually at about $10,000 to $15,000 per month. And it covers about 60% only of cash compensation. Typically, except for a few companies, does not cover RSU compensation for those of you that are at tech companies. In addition, simple term life insurance, 10 times income for a young family is usually a great starting place. And that for a healthy 30-year-old might be on the order of $40 to $50 a month for $1 million of coverage on that. So simple, strategic, effective things to take a lot of bad stuff off the table. No more than 1 to 2% of gross pre-tax income, probably a lot less than that. When we're looking at this is a further breakdown of thinking about where to put money, short-term, medium-term, long-term, for where things want to go in terms of cash, checking, and savings accounts, and having immediate liquidity. Warren Buffett says the most undervalued asset in corporate America is the option value of cash. We want to have usually 3 to 6 months of expenses here to get through a health event or a job change or some other hiccup or curveball that life throws you, as well as to take advantage of temporary opportunities as well too, so that you're secure on that piece. Midterm, this often most frequently comes up around saving up for a house, and typically that's a pretty big bar for folks here in the Bay Area on things. And then longer term, we can think about layering in some additional goals. Saving for college is usually the most frequent one in there as well. Long-term retirement accounts are great. Retirement accounts often give you a tax deferral today, but then you're fully taxed when you pull those monies out. And so there's a kind of a bit of a double-edged sword around that as well. I'm trying to move the slide here, see if it goes. There we go. One of the common questions that come up, and I imagine a number of you on the call here have old 401ks. There's really three things you could do with an old 401k. You could leave it where it is, you could roll it to a new 401k, or you could roll it into a rollover IRA. I would say, just from a hygiene perspective, it doesn't usually make a lot of sense to leave an old 401k in place unless it's one of a very small number of plans that are very old, very large, and at very well-established companies. These might be plans at places like Deloitte or Goldman Sachs that have some very unusual and exceptional retirement options inside of it. What we want to do usually is roll that either into your current 401k if you have one available to you and it's competitive from a fees and standpoint, or roll it into a rollover IRA where you're able to have more control. You can either self-manage that, or you could hire a wealth manager to manage that for you according to a strategy. That allows you to be a bit more custom. You do pay a fee for that, but that allows you to be a little more on target and a little more bespoke for your own goals on things. What you never want to do on a 401k is cash it out. That's a big gotcha that you'll pay fees and often penalties if you're under age 59 and a half to put into place. So I'd be curious how big an issue debt is for folks. Feel free to put that in there, but if there's student loans, that's not uncommon. And there's a whole topic that we'll do around student loan debt forgiveness and how to plan that out and think about kind of longer term options there in terms of loan forgiveness, consolidation, or minimizing the student loan debt for this. This can come up a lot around professional school. Some of you may be thinking about going back to grad school in some fashion and what that looks like, and see what that is as an option inside of it. The other thing to think about is if you were to leave the US, what that exit plan might look like and how you might set that up. One of the things that we always advise clients is that if you have to leave the US is to make sure that you have a ability to put in place a US mailing address or residence here so they continue to participate in and receive mail from U.S. institutions. And that's often a key part of making sure that you have a long-term game plan there as well. So when it looks at planning, it often is best and most strategic to start with a real high-level question of what would you like? What are your goals and what would you like to put down? What are the 3 to 5 things that are most important for you and your family strategically and financially about building a life here in the U.S.? Could it be buying a house, starting a family, saving for retirement, being able to have optionality regardless of what happens or how long it takes from the immigration process? And then modeling that back through the other items we discussed to make sure that you're protected. You're on target with taxes. There's often a lot of surprise when folks are first exposed to the U.S. tax system as to how complicated it can be. And how much that integrates with a lot of other pieces of financial life. We hear this a lot with folks that come from Europe or from Canada in particular on that, but often quite a bit of surprise at how important and how complex that can be. And really thinking about time horizon and how you would integrate the rest of the overall picture into an integrated plan that meets your goals and is on target for that. I think we have about 10 minutes or so left here. I think what might be interesting to do is pause for a minute and see if there's any other questions or folks that want to answer or areas we should elaborate on from either of our presentations.
Doesn't look like there's many questions just yet, Chris. Maybe you can keep just going through and chatting some more. And if anybody does have any questions, please feel free to add them into the Q&A function, or even the chat is fine.
Sure. Yeah, and if people have immigration questions as well, feel free to put those in.
Yeah, of course.
So one of the other things, diving in a little more into the investment side, one of the core principles is thinking about asset allocation and how to do this. And asset allocation, for those of you that haven't looked at this before, it stands for don't put all your eggs in one basket. And by doing this, this has some very specific benefits, which it allows us to dive in and to reduce the risk that we take on investments while keeping the same return on that. So we get paid for a for a better level of return. So if you can think about it, one example I use is, and that folks often don't fully think about or are aware of, is the asymmetric nature of risk. And so this is actually a very wealth destroying mathematical fact that I would encourage each of you to be aware of. And the simple way to think of it is this: is if you had $100 and it went down 50% tomorrow, then you would have $50. If it went back up 100%, you would be, if it went down 50%, it would be down to $50. And if it went back up 50% the day after, you would have $75. So in other words, you have symmetrical returns down 50% plus 50%, but still you've lost $25. In order to get back from that minus 50%, $100 to $50, you would actually need to go back up twice as much, 100%, to get back to where you were before. What this means is, by reducing the amount of risk, the amount of volatility they take on, the amount of up and down, every time you have to go down, it costs 2 to go back up just to get back to where you were. So one of the big things we want to do in a portfolio is minimize that volatility and make sure that you're properly paid for every unit of risk that you choose to take on inside of it. And that's super, super important. One of the big challenges that we see a lot of folks doing is that they inadvertently focus on returns without looking at time, risk, or taxes. And we find that that's a very destructive way to look at wealth. And we see in the portfolios, often relative to folks who've had an efficient allocation inside of there, typically they'll have actually less money in their account because they've had taken on more volatility. And so they've had higher returns, but they've had even higher risk. And so for most of our clients, their goal isn't to have the highest rate of return. Their goal is to have the most money in their account at the end of the day. And that's usually our goal for clients as we work through on that. So what we want to do inside of a portfolio, and I see we have a question here, what is the best way to deploy a significant amount of money in the market? Seems like the market is at an all-time high, which can be a source of hesitance to deploy on one goal. And then a second one that just came in, Kelly, thank you for that. Curious if you can give clients advice on taxes specific to home countries, or if that's a separate question we have to answer. Let me take the last one first. Always tricky to talk about taxes cross-border. And in particular, you have 2 different tax regimes. And when you talk to a tax professional, almost always what they'll tell you is you'll need a tax person in both countries. Generally, taxes are subject to what are called tax treaties. You can actually look these up. And what you'll discover is, with the United States, many countries have individual bilateral tax treaties. So the tax treatment of different items can actually vary significantly between countries with the US on that. So unfortunately, I feel like there's no general answer here. There can be sort of well-trodden paths for specific countries, and feel free to ask me offline if there's a specific country that you would want to review or take a look at. In my own experience, I've discovered something as seemingly common as moving between the US and Canada can actually be quite complicated. It's doable, but you will likely need tax representation, and ideally, folks with familiarity with the tax regime in both locations. What's often hardest to find is someone in the home country who is up to speed on US tax laws. They are voluminous and change frequently. And that's a very common need, but something that's very hard to find in the real world, unfortunately. And I do wish there was a better answer on that, but it is the state of the world right now. Going back to deploying a significant amount of money, we're big fans of what's called dollar cost averaging. We can't know what the market is doing, nor can we predict it. That's called market timing. The track record of folks who market time is usually quite poor. We may guess right, we may guess wrong, but we won't really know until afterwards. So what we typically recommend to clients is, if we know strategically that we want to invest money and be on a goal, we know the accounts we want to deploy that into, and we identify those. And then we say, let's pick a time frame, usually 6 to 12 weeks, 2 to 3 months, something like that. And each week or each day or each month, invest a certain sum of money so that we get whatever the average market price is during that time. So if the market stays flat, we invest at the flat market rate. If the market goes up, we participate over time in the market going up. If the market goes down, we haven't inadvertently bought everything at the high on that. And that can be extremely helpful. If we do that, that also mathematically means we will have a better average entry price because we've done a fixed dollar amount. So when the market is high, fixed dollar, we bought fewer shares. When the market is low, we bought more shares. So we actually have a better outcome overall from a dollar cost averaging perspective, typically. So we are a big fan of that. And then also taking the time up front to make sure strategically, this is where you want to be medium and long-term on things. So hope that answers your question, anonymous attendee. I think I'm just noticing, I think we're at 2:29. So I want to see how we're doing time-wise.
Yeah, I think with our last minute, if anybody has any final questions that you would like to have answered by either myself or Chris, do let us know. But otherwise, if you have any questions for any of us, please consider us. I'm just skipping through. Consider us both resources. This is our information that you can reach out to if you have any questions for myself or for Chris, and we would be happy to support you with any questions that you may have.
Yep. Always happy to give 20-30 minutes for free consultation on things and answer
questions. Awesome. That is so kind of you. Thank you so much, Chris. I don't see any questions, but again, thank you all so much for joining. Chris, thank you so much for joining us today as well.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Have a wonderful day, everyone, and let us know what we can do to support you. Bye.